Good morning, everybody. So it's the last day, and I understand everybody is overloaded with information and just looking forward for a weekend. But nevertheless, life is going on. And today I would like to present a little bit Ukrainian case, which is also on the surface of the security situation, not only in our region and maybe also in the world. And of course, the time I've got is not so enough to talk about all details and specific of that, but I'll try in 20-25 minutes to give you the overview of the situation, some causes of the conflict, and some conclusions about that. First of all, I would like to start maybe with some short story. Ukraine, this year we celebrate 25th anniversary of independence since the Soviet Union dissolution in 1991. In 1995, I was a military attaché here in DC, and I had a meeting with the former director of National Security Agency, William Odom. It was just 1 month after the Budapest Memorandum was signed by United States, United Kingdom, and Russia, providing security assurance to Ukraine in exchange for nuclear arsenal. And during that meeting, I've been told by the William Odom, stay agile. Because to our assessment, to US assessment, next 8 years, Russia will be busy with their own problems. But sooner or later, they will be back and they will try to get you back. So only 20 years later, I really understood his message. Well, so the causes of conflict. First of all, the context is very simple. I will give you some causes of conflict, some history, some Russian hybrid war approach, situation available now, and some short conclusion. Where we are now? Where we are now? That's it. Ukraine with Crimea next, and with a heavy presence of pro-Russian militant and Russian military in southeast of Ukraine. You can see numbers of territory. I will be back with that slide in the end of the presentation. What are the key causes of the conflict? First of all, Putin sees Ukraine as a very important part of his more ambitious project of restoring former Russian Empire. It's not about the Soviet Union, but the Russian Empire, not in terms of Russian Empire of 20th century, but as a Eurasian Union or something like broad Russian world. Russia doesn't want to lose control over Ukraine and to allow Ukraine to join European Union and NATO. And I would like to mention the words of Zbigniew Brzezinski said almost 30 years ago. Without Ukraine, Russia ceases to be a Eurasian empire. This is the core of the problems we have with Russia. There is a solution, there is a decision, there is this desire of Ukrainian people to share the values of Europe, and there is a strong desire of Russia to keep Ukraine under its control. To achieve that goal, Russia during 2004-2014 used old-fashioned Soviet-era KGB approaches to keep Ukraine under control. First of all, it's a propaganda information, talking about the values of Soviet Union, talking about the brotherhood of Slavic states and others. Then agents of influence. One of the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, before being appointed to the position in 2000, for example, 11, he was a former citizen of Russia. And after that position, he once again became a citizen of Russia. It's just a short example. Control of the political elite through corruption. All political elite in Ukraine, including the President Yanukovych, they were connected, related through different business projects and other with Russian elite. Control over mass media. Heavy presence of Russian TV stations, radio stations in Ukraine with a propaganda machine working. Creating and supporting pro-Russian organizations and groups in Ukraine. Also, a lot of money being invested in numerous parties, groups, especially in southeast territories in Crimea, to support the idea of broad state, including all former Soviet Union republics. The history of the conflict. The conflict started inside Ukraine, first of all, in November 2013, because President Yanukovych, under the pressure from Putin, in the last moment, just the last day, last minute, refused to sign the association agreement of Ukraine with the European Union. It was a huge negative blow to society in Ukraine. The same day, students, they started the protest. The next day, the protest been suppressed very heavily by law enforcement. The next day, thousands, 10,000s of people came to the central square of Kiev, and mass protest started, called Maidan. Maidan in Ukraine is the name of the central square in Kiev. During December 2013, February 2014, government tried to suppress the protests. In February, they applied force. More than 100 people were killed. We call them Heaven 100. So after that, you can imagine the society was very exaggerated, very excited, and escalation of protest started. Now we call it a revolution of dignity. For outsiders, of course, it looked like a little bit uprising or something like that. But inside Ukraine, majority of the population, they really understood the causes of that and supported with all their efforts. In this situation, Yanukovych fled to Russia. And not only him. The next morning, after the uprising, all ministers, all law enforcement leadership, all armed forces leadership, they left Ukraine. Only parliament took over responsibility of the country, and they created an acting transition government to rule the situation. In this situation, Putin was very frustrated because situation in Ukraine got out of his control. And all following steps, his steps, were based on emotions, not taking into consideration future consequences for Russia itself. So he started with so-called enforced scenario. Crimea been annexed with active participation of Russian special operation units. You can see a picture here. It's Russian soldiers. It's not Ukrainian soldiers in Crimea. At the same time, in southeast Ukraine, Russian militants, people, citizens of Russia with a weapon, came into some small cities in East Ukraine and started to take over administration buildings, of course, with support of local pro-Russian elements. So Ukraine at the time, once again, no government, no law enforcement, no leadership in armed forces, not clear situation in the east, some militants with a weapon. We started so-called anti-terrorist operation because Russia didn't announce a war or declare a war. They started hybrid war. So the natural reaction of the transitional government to address it as an anti-terrorist operation. What were the Putin expectation when he started this? First of all, he relied upon the moods and sentiments of people in east and south of Ukraine, expecting them to be pro-Russian oriented. Then he just expected the further demoralization of armed forces of Ukraine and law enforcement agencies. And he also relied on the incapability of transitional government to react. And he expected neutrality of international community and trying to present the case in Ukraine as an internal civil war and trying to keep as much as possible absence information about the presence of Russian military in Ukraine. And also he relied on the stable economy of Russia. At the time, Russia just accumulated a lot of reserves because of the higher oil prices in 2013. And they still believed that the prices will grow on and they will have a lot of resources to keep that conflict going forever. So key elements of Russian hybrid war in Ukraine in 2014, 2016. First of all, on the first place, it's a special operation forces. It's a real pictures made in Crimea. So those so-called green soldiers, they blocked our military bases. Once again, military bases which were without leadership in Kiev. No Minister of Defense, no Chief of General Staff, nobody just sending any orders. So they just a little bit confused with the Russian special operation forces at the gates. Later on, Russian regular units, they were active participants in East Ukraine, in the Donbass area. It's real pictures. Those two guys from armored division from Buryatia. Buryatia is somewhere in the Siberia. It's deep inside Russia. They've been sent. It's in the area of Debaltsevo, 2015. Also, militants from Russia. They're at the beginning of the conflict. They started this administration mess in East Ukraine. It's real pictures. All of them citizens of Russia. Many of them volunteered. Many of them really just seen the situation in Ukraine as a kind of covert operation of West against Russia. And they called Ukraine separatists. Weapon and armament, the flow of that stuff come to Ukraine in two years. All those pictures is the pictures of Russian equipment, not made, not from the stock, not in Ukraine, made in, not from the stocks of Ukraine armed forces. Yes, we also have pro-Russian elements in Ukraine. Without them, it would be difficult for Russia to keep that situation running for 2 years. Propaganda and disinformation. It's a heavy weapon of Russian system. They use it widely around the world, not only in Ukraine. Here is only one couple of examples how they use different pictures to present it in different background. And then total control of mass media. There is no channels, TV channels in Russia, independent channels, out-of-control channels, who can present the case of Ukraine to Russian public in more or less objective way. At the same time, Putin miscalculations. First of all, He overestimated the pro-Russian moods and sentiments in East and South Ukraine. Majority of people there decided to stay neutral. At the same time, young generation who never lived in Soviet Union and who didn't understand the ideas of broad Russian world, they took active position and they stopped pro-Russian groups expanding. Mature civil society in Ukraine. Putin underestimated the civil society in Ukraine. He didn't expect the phenomenon of volunteer movement. And this phenomenon contributed a lot in stopping Russian aggression at the beginning, when we didn't have a proper governance and when we had a collapse of the executive branch. Volunteers, people, businessmen, teachers, students, all over Ukraine, they moved to the area. They acquired weapons from the government, and they stopped at the beginning militants, Russian militants coming to Ukraine. Only later on, the Russian regular came in. Our armed forces more or less succeeded to continue that process. Then, international sanctions against Russia. Putin didn't expect international sanctions. Immediately after that, most of the resources which have been accumulated in Russia started to drain. In 2 years, he lost reserves necessary to finance that war. And dramatic fall of oil prices also contributed in that. So, and global information net effect, what I mean, that it is very difficult, even impossible to cover your presence in any kind area of the world, or it's difficult to cover your activity in a modern information global net. So immediately, on the next 2 days after Russian presence in Crimea, a huge flow of information came into internet with the pictures of soldiers, with the interview, with the comments, and it was difficult for Putin to keep it low profile. That's the problem. Next, prisoners. Russia never expected that the military become prisoners of war. They're real pictures. The Russian soldiers, which have been kept on the territory of Ukraine. On the right side, you see the platoon of them. Platoon of them, 20 kilometers deep in the territory of Ukraine. We gave them back, all of them, to Putin. We accepted his version. They were on exercise in Russia, and unfortunately, they've been lost. That's why 20 kilometers inside Ukraine and others. On the left, it's during one of the combat operations in Ukraine being captured. Next, he never expected things like that. MH117, everybody know about that. Shot down by a Russian missile from a Russian system, moved from Russia inside Ukraine, just in the middle of the crisis. Also this case, Ukrainian pilot, Lieutenant Savchenko. Now she got 23 years of prison in Russia. She was captured in Ukraine, transferred to Russia, and punished for what she considered to be her duty, to protect her, to defend her country. So now it's become international political case, unexpected for Putin. He never expected that this young woman to be so strong up to the end. Now she is now on hunger strike after announcing the convention. In this situation, Russia relied on the so-called three-D approach in its campaign of obfuscation. First of all, to dismiss, as Putin did about his soldiers in Crimea. Then to distort, as one of the actors didn't play a role of pro-Russian Ukrainian. To distract, it's about the airline. And to dismay, as Russia threatened to deploy the nuclear bombers in Crimea. So where we are now, once again, for today, thanks to our people, to volunteer movement, thanks to higher motivation of population, we managed in 2 years to build up an adequate armed force to stop any kind of further Russian movement inside Ukraine. And last year, after several bad examples for Russia, Putin understood that there is no military solution to take back Ukraine. And so political negotiations started. We call it Minsk Agreement. Ukraine, Russia, Germany, France, and OSCE are participants. The key points of the agreement are ceasefire under OSCE control, constitutional changes in Ukraine is a Russia requirement, decentralization, withdrawal of foreign militants from Donetsk-Lugansk region. It means not only volunteers, so-called, from Russia, but also Russian military. Ukrainian control over border with Russia in the east, and local election and amnesty. So it's a key point of this agreement. It's going on. It's not yet implemented in full. We expect by the end of the year some positive results, but nevertheless, there is a light in the end of tunnel in terms of political decision. Consequences for Russia. First of all, Crimea is the territory is not recognized as a territory of Russia. It's occupied territory. 100 nations, they voted for the resolution of General Assembly of United Nations in 2014, which didn't recognize the so-called referendum in Crimea. Degradation of Russian economy. We can see it in numbers. Fall in GDP, social problems. Loss of trust and confidence and reputation of Russia. Consolidation of Ukrainian society. Yes, we have a lot of problems now inside Ukraine in terms of economy, corruption, political instability. But the general mood of population, general motivation of young people especially, that's we've done it. So we made our course. We have chosen our values. We are looking for European values. And even we are not talking about the membership or something else. We are talking about the values, first of all. Consolidation, once again, of Ukrainian society, long-term freezing Ukrainian-Russian relations. You can imagine, if young people, 20, 40 years old, participated in war with Russia, it means that the next 20 years is minimum, after all of them become politicians in Ukraine. This case will be with them. And that is a tragedy, not only for Ukraine, but for Russia too. And growing internal instability in Russia is a result of economic problems, other problems. So this instability creates unpredictable future for Russia. So conclusion is, In case of Ukraine, the Russian hybrid war approach could provide some temporary tactical achievements, but it created a lot of long-term strategic risks and problems for Russia, first of all. Is it worth it? The history will give its answer. Thank you very much.